I want to kind of segue, if I can, the message today. I was in my office on Wednesday and received a phone call. And I thought initially when, the phone call came that I would, I'd put on my pastoral kind of counseling hat and I would walk through the situation, with grace, but, just kind of helping to steer the conversation. Little did I know that I would be, if you will, hit in the head with a 2x4. And I was convicted in so many levels, in so many ways. It took all of about 2 minutes of conversation before I thought, oh my God, I have made many mistakes. And it wasn't long after that I thought, this has to be shared on Sunday. And so I don't want to take away his thunder. I want him to be able to share freely. But so I asked Vic Dumas if he would just share what's on his heart with us today. Could we please give Vic a warm welcome, my friend. Vic, I'm going to give you a hug, dude, if that's okay.
Again?
I just won't breathe in you. I know. He said again. Vic, so we were on the phone, and like I said, initially I thought I was going to help you, and you end up just kind of, I know it wasn't your intention to beat me up, but it did. So why don't you just share a little bit about what you talked to me about on the phone, and just kind of share your heart, and then we'll just talk.
Okay. First, thank you for this opportunity. I think it's a blessing in disguise. And second, I like to wish my wife a happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
12 years, 12 good years. She stuck through me through a lot of stuff there, so we don't need to go into that. But anyway, again, thanks for letting me share, and I apologize in advance if I get a little bit emotional, and I apologize if anyone is offended. But what I'm going to say is not to offend anyone. But like Pastor Jason said, I think it's something that needs to be brought to, that I need to say in relationship to the George Floyd incident. I just want to give a little background to kind of set the stage, to kind of give you my perspective, or why I have the perspective that I have. My family moved from Cleveland to South Central LA in 1978. Those of you that don't know about South Central LA, it's a very highly crime area, drugs, gangs, and anything that you can name, just like any other major inner city. As a kid growing up, 13 and up, I had some very bad experience with the local law enforcement, very heavy-handed. Slurs, racial slurs. I never was hit but I was pushed around, grabbed by the neck, handcuffed, put on the ground unnecessarily so. I know now unlawful searches and seizures and all the above. And this is something that myself and my brothers and pretty much everyone in my neighborhood kind of experienced. Hate to say it, but it was the norm. So shortly after that, I joined the military. I joined the Air Force. I spent 4 years in the Air Force as a military cop or police. And the reason why, you're probably asking, well, if you had all these bad experiences, why would you join an organization like that? Well, it goes back to what my dad has always told me, and I still remember today, is that if you see a problem with something, it's your duty to stand up and do something about it. Don't complain about something if you're not willing to do something about it. So that was my way of doing something about it, by first joining the military, getting my foot wet as far as law enforcement. And then shortly after that, I spent another 2 years in the private sector, security officer in LA and in Las Vegas. And then shortly after that, I joined the police department in Las Vegas, where I've served for 24 years. So I got about 30 years of law enforcement experience between the three entities. During my time in As a police officer, I worked in patrol, obviously. Worked the plainclothes details. I worked on critical incident review panels. I wrote policies. I was on the board of directors for the union. Served in SWAT a total of 13 years. 4 years as an operator, and the 9 as a supervisor. So again, why am I telling you about this experience? Not to brag or gloat or anything, but just wanted to paint that picture that I'm not anti-government, not anti-cop, obviously, and I'm not against peaceful protests, but I am against police brutality, people that riot and destroy things just because to do so, not for the cause, obviously. So that's why I wanted to paint that picture. And of course, again, any injustice that's done to anyone for that sake. So obviously this wasn't the first incident of this type, but for the last 24 years, the way I dealt with it, or the way I felt I was dealing with it, it was, again, going back, that's the reason why I joined the police department, to ensure that no one would have the same experience that not only myself and my brothers and my friends had. I felt if I was on the police department, if I saw anything like that, that I could stop it. And a couple of incidents I did. And becoming a supervisor, I conveyed to the men and women that worked for me that it wouldn't be tolerated, obviously, and they were to treat everyone with respect, and the same respect that not only that they deserve, but them themselves would demand. So that was my way of dealing with it, because obviously there were incidents within that 24 years, and obviously there have been incidents in the last 5 years. I've been retired now for 5 years, and for the 5 years I have not dealt with any of the incidents up to this point the way I had before, because I had the platform to do it while I was working. Not being on the police department, not having that communication, I felt that I wasn't doing it. So for the last 5 years, I really haven't been. But when this incident occurred and I watched it, it did something different to me, if I could say that, because I guess the manner of it, I mean, usually it's by a gunshot that one of these incidents happen, but the fact that someone's breath was being taken away from them, and knowing that something like that doesn't occur within 30 seconds or a minute, like versus a gunshot. And then to think that the person that's filming that, what kind of emotions that they're going to be going through for the rest of their life, to have seen that and recorded it. So I was very mad, angry, felt very useless, worthless, one and the same. The pain I had, I was heartbroken, sad, any and all the emotions at one time. And I was basically at the bottom of that funnel, spiraling. And it was really, 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 really digging into me. So, and the other sad note about that is that, and I like to apologize to my wife, is that I didn't share it with her. So that made it 10 times worse because I kept it in. So I was ashamed because being a black man and being a police officer, I started questioning myself. You know, what type of man am I? What type of black man am I? And that might sound unimportant to you, but it means a lot to me, and I hope you can understand the meaning of it. And then I was questioning myself as to what type of father was I to my daughter. So I received a call from a friend of mine who was also very angry about it, very outspoken about it, had pretty much the same emotions that I had. Very concerned about her kids, having a son and a daughter. Our interactions with police officers are different than than what you might experience. So she was concerned. She said, "Vic, we need to do something about this. It's a very small percentage of black people in this community, but we need to stand up and do something and say something." And I was like, "Well, what do you have in mind?" And she said, "Well, we can do a protest and peacefully walk and march and do our thing." And I was in total agreement with that, but I know from based on my experience that the protest was not my platform. I dealt with a lot of civil unrest, rallies, and protests, and regardless, they seem to always turn. And I wasn't in a place to deal with that if it turned bad. So I told her I would think about it, but I knew that wasn't going to be the platform that I chose. So I just told her that I would get back to her, and by that time I'm really, after hearing it again from her, I'm really feeling bad about things. So one day, Christy comes in and she wakes me up, and she says, "Who passed? Who died in Las Vegas?" It's like, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. She said, "It's all over Facebook." So I go to Facebook, and it's a culture within, at least with my old police department. When someone passes in the line of duty, they change their profile pictures on their social media to the symbol of the badge with it shrouded, meaning that someone passed in the line of duty. So as I was scrolling through Facebook and looking through all my friends' page, there was no story. It was just the badge and sad faces and tears. So I ended up calling a friend of mine and asked him what happened, and he told me, new officer, brand new officer, fairly new, 29 years old, and this was after the civil unrest had already started in Vegas, and just doing his job, making an arrest on people that were being violent. And while he was doing that, it was two stories. One said it was point blank, and the other one said it was about 50 feet away. But either or, got shot in the face or the back of the head, went through his spine, and obviously was transported to the hospital. And he's in critical condition right now as we speak, on life support. So I had all the emotions for George, but then a fellow brother police officer goes down fighting the other fight, and so now I'm really angry, and that's when I knew that because I wasn't sharing it with my wife, I knew that I had to do something, had to say something, but I needed some guidance. So I called Pastor Jason, and he's right. He basically got 5 years of pain. And I'm just glad he listened and didn't tell me, "Vic, get off the phone and call me when you're better." But so the phone call went, and shortly thereafter, he said he had the avenue for me, because I didn't know what the avenue was, but I knew I had to do something. Being a black man and being an ex-police officer, I had to speak up for both, because I was truly in support of both, obviously. So that's why we are here. And why church? Why? Well, because as Christians we should have sympathy, empathy, and compassion for others. So I think it's important that this conversation is had, and we talk about that, because often we look at people or look at situations that don't look like us or don't affect us, and we don't address it because it's not affecting us immediately. It's not my family. It's not my brother, not my sister, not my mom. That's somebody else, you know. So we don't take time to do that. So that's why we're here again, to talk about the unconscious or the subconscious bias that I think is the fruit of a lot of it. Sometimes we don't like to admit that we have a certain bias or prejudice, and please don't get that confused with being racist. It's two different things. But
If I can
go ahead.
hold off for a moment, when I spoke with you on the phone, I never considered myself a racist person ever, and I know this is kind of where you're going to go. I would, it wasn't until talking to you that I realized that although I wasn't racist, I did hold some bias, and I never realized that. And I think I used to, I would say stuff like, we're all the same, or I don't see color. And after talking to you and looking at stuff, I realized that in itself was a very prejudiced statement, because the fact that I could say I didn't see color meant that I did not understand, that I didn't see what a Native American goes through in their life, and I didn't see what a Mexican went through in their life, or what a black person went through in their life, and the history, and it's there, and I didn't see it, and I realize now that that's not a good statement to say I don't see color, but that I need to see the difference, and I need to see the history, and I need to understand, and I think you really woke that up for me a lot. I don't want to take away your thunder, and I just wanted to put that in there, because I think a lot of us feel the same way. We think, that I don't see color, it doesn't affect me, but we all have a prejudice. We all have a prejudice, and it may not be a stereotypical that prejudice, but we all think about a certain race in a certain way, and that's a prejudice. And the healing is to understand that prejudice. I'm sorry, I'm taking away your time, but
you're fine. Fine.
I'll hand it back over to you.
So another issue that drove me to call Pastor Jason is that and this was my perception that I have debunked myself, is that I felt that the incident wasn't being addressed here, that no one was acknowledging that it happened, not necessarily for or against or whatever, but there wasn't even a conversation being had. And I have found out or agreed with myself that the reason why I was probably not hearing the conversation because of the whole quarantine thing, we weren't going anywhere. So we were basically having a conversation at home, about the incident, not about my emotions, but about the incident. But as of yesterday, there was a peaceful march at the park. I don't know if any of you guys know about it or even went. Had a very decent turnout. And there was all sorts of people there. So I stand corrected that the conversation obviously was being addressed. And I don't know what organization put it on. I don't know if it was a bunch of, I don't know. But I'm glad that it happened, and I'm glad that it was peaceful. And I'd like to back up a little bit in reference to living in LA and experiences, is that in 1991 or 1992 is when the Rodney King incident happened, where it was the black motorist that got beat by 4 white officers in LA. When that came out, I was about a week into the police academy as a new recruit. So we were in class. I forget what we were doing, but we were in class, and the instructors came in made us sit down, put our books away, and played this video of the incident. And we all watched it for however long it went on. And just to paint the picture, a police academy is about 120 people. There was 10 black people, I think 2 Hispanic and 2 females, or 4 females, I'm sorry, and 2 of those females were black. So, and we're all from various areas, myself being from LA, my best friend from south side of Chicago, another friend from Philly, 2 friends from West Las Vegas, which is the predominantly black area of Las Vegas. And after it was complete, the instructors turned on the video and turned off the video, and it turned on the lights, and it started a conversation, which was the right thing to do. And the white cadets in there, male and female, was in awe, as if it was the very first time they've ever seen it. Some even asked, well, where is this and when did it take place? Is this from the civil rights? Because it was in black and white, so they figured it was something old. I knew what it was. I knew about it, but the instructor said, no, that's present time. That's a couple of days ago. And they were like, how does this happen? Well, I was like, that's normal. I mean, think about it. It was normal to me. Rodney King wasn't the very first black person I'd seen beat in the streets, broad daylight. It was normal in our neighborhood, in my eyes.
And this is, again, what's so interesting, because we feel like it's not normal. We always hear about the exception. But in talking to you, and since I talked to you, this is, when I walk into a grocery store, it's different.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yes.
I never walk into a grocery store thinking they're looking at me.
No.
Ever.
No.
But in talking to you, that's a regular occurrence.
It's normal. If it's not being done, I'm wondering.
Yeah. And I can't even relate. I can't even, I've never felt that way. When I get pulled over, I think I'm gonna get a ticket. Dang it. I've never thought about harassment or.
And when I get pulled over, even now, I'm thinking, how is this traffic stop going to turn into something out of hand? And, just to be fair, the 5 years I've been here, I've been stopped 3 times, 1 by Esky and 2 by state police, and I haven't had any issues. I've had guns on me because I'm a concealed carrier, and I never had any issues. But I do know of incidents
And you grew up with a lot of issues.
But I grew up with a lot of it, and so
Yeah.
and I expect, and being on the police department, my police department was not heaven. There were some incidents. Like I said, I've served on a bunch of the critical incident review panels to review questionable shootings or unlawful use or excessive force. So it happens, and I've seen it. So yeah, it wasn't the first that I saw that, but the other cadets were just at all that was happening in present time, where it was just recently. So and again, so that's why this topic all came up. And again, I wanted to talk about the sympathy and empathy, and just recognizing that it's okay to recognize that you have a bias, because everyone in here has a bias. If you search deep down and really be true to yourself, you'll find it. It's there. But that's not the issue. The issue is when you don't educate yourself on how to deal with that issue, and to recognize that you are treating a certain person and or group differently and favoring another group because of what you might have experienced, what you might perceive, what you might heard, seen on TV. I wouldn't have never spent 30 years in law enforcement if I thought that every police officer was the same way that the police officers treated me. It doesn't make sense, right? So you have to realize that there's a lot of good cops out there. But there are bad cops out there. There are a lot of people out there that protesting and are very peaceful protesters. There are people out there that are just out there for the cause to cause damage. And that's the stigma. We're quick to clump everyone up of that group based on one or two people. I mean, I have on my arm 10 of my friends that have passed in the line of duty, and I could tell you if they had a chance to do it again, they would do the same job. So there's good cops out there, so I just want to make that whole, and I want people to at least have the conversation about an incident if you feel something is unjust. Being quiet or being silent is being complicit. It means that you agree with it in a way, not necessarily verbally. And that's why I had the issue, because I knew I didn't agree with it, but yet I wasn't doing or saying anything about it. So that's what was tearing me apart. And go back to what you were saying about not asking anyone to agree with me, or you have your right to agree or disagree, but the way I see the world or America through my eyes is different than you. I have to prove that I belong. More than likely you don't. I have to prove that I'm supposed to be in a particular area. Well, you probably won't. I have to worry about my conversation with my daughter being society, even though she's biracial, society will label her as a black female. My conversation with her, as far as dealing with the law enforcement, is different than the conversation that you would have with your kids. But that's real. That's not just an assumption, or it's real, because it is different. In my eyes, even having 30 years of law enforcement, I know that there's two different set of laws for black, white, rich, and poor. And again, you can agree with me or don't agree with me, that's fine. But I have 30 years experience to say life experience that is true. So if you take anything away from this, and I hope that you do, pray that you do, is that the point is to have that conversation with your kids. If you're uncomfortable about talking about race, I'm very comfortable about talking about race to anyone. But if you're uncomfortable about talking about race to your friends and your family, good. You should be uncomfortable. You should be uncomfortable a little bit. And I promise you that uncomfortableness will pass. Because Pastor Jason and I can have a conversation as pastor and church member. And we can have a conversation friend to friend if he wasn't my pastor and I wasn't a member here. But often we don't. Often we turn away because he's different than I am, or he comes from a different background. So get used to having that conversation. Get used to talking to people about things like this that don't look like you, because that way you can educate yourself and get a completely different perspective. Now, I know that there's not a large percentage of black people here, but there is a large percentage of Native Americans here that get treated just as bad and has been treated just as bad, history-wise and sometimes currently. The 5 years I've been here, I've heard things about the Native Americans here that, one, not true, and two, it's just completely derogatory. So get comfortable being uncomfortable and having a conversation. And I'm glad that obviously the conversation was heard, because that's why the march took place. I think the problem is a lot of us just don't take the time to really get to know someone or share their experience. And it might be fear or guilt. you're afraid to ask because you might be afraid to what you might hear. But I can tell you, if you ask a person, they more than likely will just tell you. But if you sit there and assume, then that feeds your prejudice, because chances are the things that you heard, I mean, if none of you knew me, what would, and you don't have to say it, but what would be your perception of who I am? Right? I have to prove that I'm not the drug dealer. I have to prove that I'm not the criminal. I have to prove that I'm not a gangster.
Yeah.
Never been. But before someone gets to know me, they assume that. And now I have to prove them otherwise.
Yeah. Since our conversation on Wednesday, I kind of took a lot of studying. I looked up what you told me, what you shared with me, and I walked away with some points. And so I want to give you just a few thoughts, some takeaways, if you would. The first one was be moved with compassion. Be moved with compassion. When you hear about what happened with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor, with Ahmaud Arbery, be moved with compassion, as if the injustice happened against someone you loved dearly. So be moved as if it happened to someone you loved, as if it was your child that was held down, on the throat with a knee for 8 minutes. If it was your daughter that was, they broke it when eight police went into her house and shot her 8 times or something like that. I mean, be moved as if it was you, somebody you know. Number one. Number two, face your own prejudice. So own it, and we talked about this. Just own it. Know what you believe. Know what you really feel. When you see a person of a different color, how do you really feel? How do you respond? And recognize that for what it is, and work on what you can. Number three, I think, is so important. Don't remain silent about false narratives. Make a stand, especially when you're on social media, when you hear people, silence or ignorance is not bliss. There's so many false narratives that we see every day, and we let them go on. I just want to suggest to you, stand up against a false narrative, against a false story. And remember, it's not about winning an argument, and so don't argue, but just speak truth with love. But so much happens that we allow to happen, and we know that it's a false narrative. Number four, standing with someone doesn't mean that you are standing against someone else. So just because you stand with what happened with George Floyd, and doesn't mean that you're standing against police. You can still take a stand and say that it was unjust and it wasn't right and it was inhumane. That doesn't mean that you're standing against police officers. My best friends are police officers, and I can still stand and say this wasn't right and still love police officers. So just because you're standing with somebody doesn't mean you're standing against somebody else. And then number four, I would encourage you, go to bethebridge.com. Bethebridge.com. Write that down. If what you're hearing today is new to you, and you're like, I don't know if I believe it, there is a history. There is a history that most of us are completely naive about. And bethebridge.com is a great start to understanding and to having a conversation and to recognizing your own prejudice. So I think that's a great start. But go ahead and share what's your story.
I share a quick story with you. It's going to appear as if it's a joke, but it's obviously not a joke. 2 black guys and a white guy pull up to a brand new house in a new subdivision in Las Vegas, 1993. Outside, looking at the house, pointing at the house, having a small conversation. The neighbor, middle-aged white guy, comes out and approaches the 3 guys, the 2 black guys and the 1 white guy, and all in close proximity of each other. And he looks at the white guy and starts a conversation. Hey, how you doing? Welcome to the neighborhood type thing. And then he says, it must be nice to have all this free help to help you move in. And the white guy looks at him and said, well, I wouldn't know because this is not my house and I'm the help and this is his house, pointed to one of the other black guys. The black guy he pointed to that he was talking about was me. The other black guy was my brother. Had just bought a new house in a new area. It wasn't a real fancy house, but he couldn't conceive the point that a black guy was buying a house in that particular neighborhood. So from that point on, I lived there from 1993 to 2005 in a house, and living right next door to him, I probably had 5 words to say to him because I had that initial contact I had with him, I had completely, because of what he said and what he said, I completely shut him out and didn't deal with him, which was probably the wrong thing to do then, but I was a lot younger there and my perspective was a lot different. If that was to happen now, I probably would still have this type of conversation with him. So after that, he shortly found out what I did for a living, which was a police officer. And he found that out, I didn't cover this in the first one, but he found that out because the police car was parked in front of my house. And I actually forgot this part. So he comes out to me one day when I'm outside, and he's like, hey, I don't know what you got going on over there, but lately there's been police cars at your house almost every night. I was like, yeah, every night about 9 o'clock, between 9 and 10 o'clock, roughly. He's like, yeah. I said, yeah, that's normally when I eat lunch. He's like, eat lunch at 9 o'clock at night? Yeah, I eat lunch because I work swing shift. He's like, well, why is all the cops at your house? Because I'm bring friends over. I said, because I'm a cop. That's my car. And I'm coming home to eat lunch at my house. So once he found out what I did for a living, now I'm his buddy. He wants to be buddy. He wants to come over and have a drink. He wants to have dinner and hang out. But at that point, like I said, I had already turned him off. And that's what I mean is that in my eyes, I have to prove I wasn't worth his time until he found out what I did for a living. Till he found out if something was to happen in the neighborhood that I lived right next door to him. So, again, how I view the world through my eyes are different. And if you don't take anything else from that, just understand that I see things different. I understand things differently. I process things in my head different because of my experience and the experience of my ancestors. And so it's not a bad thing to recognize that. It's a good thing to recognize that. So.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've pastored for 20 years. I've never had a standing ovation.
Sure you have. You're not supposed to see it.
I know. Father, thank you so much for being with us today. I want to have your heart, Jesus. You went out of your way to look out for the disenfranchised, for those that where injustice was done, you fought for. And Lord, we want to have the same heart. Being a disciple is emulating your pattern. You moved with compassion on the despised. You moved with empathy. You fought for people. And I pray that would be our heart as well. I thank you for Vic. I thank you for his willingness to be vulnerable and honest and in front of a group like this and watching online. Thank you for his vulnerability. I pray that you continue to bless him and his wife and his daughter and continue to lead them and guide them. Continue to watch over them and continue to give them a platform to speak truth. To speak truth. In Jesus' name, amen.